For more than 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind has sat upon the golden throne in a state between death and divinity. His body decayed, yet his will piercing through eternity. Terra has known no sunrise without his shadow stretching across it, no night without his silent presence felt in the minds of billions. The Imperium has built entire religions upon his stillness, forged belief systems upon his silence, and declared doctrines from interpretations of what might be his will. Many have forgotten he was once a man, a conqueror, a strategist, a father, and not simply a god carved from light and legend. In the stillness of the throne, no heartbeat is heard, no breath is drawn, yet there is something beneath that stillness, a faint stirring, as though consciousness itself is turning in its sleep. A whisper runs through the Imperium, not as sound, but as pressure. Across Terra, in halls of gold and bone, the High Lords conduct their rituals of power, never imagining that the eyes watching them, ancient, buried beneath ages of dust, might ever open again. They speak confidently in council chambers, decree laws, direct armies and fleets, all under the assumption that the Emperor's silence is permanent, predictable, and safe. But psychers begin to twitch in their sleep. Astropaths wake screaming. Navigators feel static burning across their souls. It begins not with roaring trumpets or holy light, but with tiny fractures in psychic stability. The Astronomicon flickers, just once, so briefly that it can be dismissed as a glitch, a fluctuation, an anomaly. But the old priests of Mars who tend the throne tremble, because they know that the golden throne does not flicker. It either burns or ends, and if it ends, everything ends with it. Deep within the vaulted chambers, where ancient machines hum and cables pulse like veins, the Emperor's essence touches the edges of awareness, not fully waking, not yet, but experiencing the galaxy as if through a blurred lens of memory and regret. He remembers the War Master's betrayal, not as a myth, but as a wound. He remembers Sanguinius's broken form, Magnus's pleas, Vulcan's loyalty, and Russ's rage. He remembers the hope of a unified humanity, shattered before it matured. And as these memories stir, so too does another thought, darker, that in his absence, humanity did not merely stagnate, it corrupted. The Imperium is not what he envisioned. Faith replaced knowledge, superstition replaced science, dogma replaced freedom. This is not his empire. It is something twisted from it. Outside the silent palace, pilgrims kneel by the millions, chanting prayers, reciting litanies, believing their devotion sustains the Emperor's light. But something strange happens among them. A wave of unease, a sensation as though something is listening. Not the saintly, loving God they imagine, but a presence vast and cold as cosmic vacuum. Some begin weeping without understanding why. Others feel joy, believing it a sign of his return. But many, especially the psychers, feel dread prickling across their minds like crawling insects. They feel a power so immense that it erases individuality, shrinks identity, forces the realization that humanity is not ready for what is waking. They thought they prayed for resurrection, but a God waking may not be gentle. Across the galaxy, far from Terra, in places the Emperor's eyes have not truly touched for millennia, strange echoes ripple through the warp. Eldar farseers feel visions shatter like cracked glass. Daemons recoil, sensing an intelligence in the Imperium that does not belong to chaos. The Tyranid hive mind shifts direction, as though something vast and ancient casts a psychic shadow even it must acknowledge. And somewhere in the deep emptiness of space, forgotten Primarchs stir, not physically, but in legend, in psychic resonance, as though the Emperor's memory of them is enough to send ripples through the fabric of fate. The galaxy does not yet know it, but the balance is tipping. Something long dormant is beginning to remember itself. And upon the golden throne, surrounded by the whispers of a billion souls, the Emperor's awareness narrows. Not fully awake, but no longer fully asleep. Beneath layers of agony, silence, decay, and enforced godhood, something sharp and wrathful opens like an ancient eye, not of compassion, not of mercy, but of judgment. For when humanity worshipped him, it misunderstood him. He did not want prayers. He wanted progress. He did not want blind obedience. He wanted enlightenment. And as that terrible consciousness focuses, one truth becomes clear. When the Emperor finally wakes, those who twisted his vision, those who corrupted his dream, those who wore his symbol as chains and crowns, they will die first. In the far reaches of the segmentum solar, whispers begin as faint, confused signals in astropathic channels, barely detectable tremors of psychic static. Astropaths, normally accustomed to the steady calm of the Emperor's guiding beacon, instead feel something irregular, like a pulse skipping its rhythm. Most dismiss it at first, believing it to be a misalignment in neural calibration or fatigue from endless message relays. But the sensation grows. Messages arrive incomplete. Psychic transmissions distort into broken syllables and veiled laughter. Some astropaths report hearing a voice, not in the words they send, but in the gaps between them. A presence that listens rather than speaks, heavy and patient. Fear spreads quietly, because they know something the common citizen does not. The Astronomicon does not deviate. If it wavers, something monumental is shifting. In the navigator houses that thread ships through the swirling madness of the warp, discomfort blooms like infection. The navigators, those third-eyed mutants bred to perceive the Emperor's light, feel strain in their inner sight. For millennia, the Emperor's psychic beacon has been a constant star, an eternal lighthouse burning through the tides of the Imperium. But now they see fluctuations. Subtle at first, a dimming, a surge, a flicker. Some navigators recoil in horror, not because the Emperor's presence weakens, but because it changes. It becomes colder, stronger, more focused, like a watcher becoming aware of their gaze. One navigator collapses mid-transit, clutching his face as his third eye bleeds luminous fluid. His last coherent words are whispered. He sees back. His family thinks him mad, but others quietly wonder what it means for a god to. On Terra, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica struggles to maintain stability. Entire corridors filled with psychers become unstable as mass visions ripple through the telepathic networks. Many see the same imagery: shining armor covered in dust, broken wings, a golden figure whose eyes remain closed yet bleed light. Some see Terra burning. Some see a single hand lifting from a throne. Others see nothing but the silhouette of a king emerging from darkness. Silent alarms echo through secure chambers as senior psychers document each shared hallucination. They attempt to rationalize collective psychosis, warp fluctuation, random cognitive bleed. But they know better. Shared visions among psychers are not coincidence. They are synchronicity. And when synchronicity touches those attuned to the Emperor, it is always a warning. Meanwhile, deep within the administrative sanctums of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests assigned to the Golden Throne observe anomalies in its operation. The sensors, ancient, layered through 10,000 years of repairs and rituals, detect power oscillations never recorded before. The throne's systems seem to respond as though new instructions are being delivered, not by human command, but by the occupant himself. Some junior tech priests suggest recalibration. Others insist on ritual appeasement. Yet the senior magi recognize the terrifying possibility. The Emperor might be altering his own interface with the machinery. They debate in encoded binary chants, fearing that even voicing such speculation is blasphemy. For if the Emperor begins to act independently, their role as caretakers becomes obsolete and perhaps punishable. Among the common citizens of Terra, rumors spread with the speed of superstition. Pilgrims waiting in the kilometers-long queues outside the sanctum say that a strange warmth passed through them, like sunlight under the skin. Others insist they felt a presence examining their thoughts. Some swear they heard footsteps in the sky. Fanatical zealots rejoice, proclaiming resurrection is near. Preachers scream that the Emperor will walk among them soon, burning heresy with his gaze. But there are also those who feel something else, not joy, but dread. They whisper to one another that gods do not wake peacefully, and that a sleeping sun turning its face upon mortals is not a blessing, but a judgment. Their fear is quickly silenced by ecclesiarchy enforcers, but it remains alive beneath the skin of the masses. On certain battlefields far from Terra, soldiers mid-conflict experience inexplicable sensations. Imperial Guard troopers fighting orcs on distant worlds freeze as an overwhelming stillness sweeps across their minds. Space Marines engaged against Chaos forces briefly lose synchronization in formation as their mental clarity fluctuates. Even the Adeptus Astartes, warriors whose minds are bolstered by gene-forged discipline, feel a presence ripple through their neural conditioning. Some commanders report moments of total silence, where every thought blinks out and returns with sharp precision. It is as if someone or something glanced across their minds, measuring them. And though it lasts mere seconds, it leaves behind an aftertaste, the sensation of being judged, evaluated, categorized. In the black ships carrying psychers toward Terra for sacrifice, the captive psychers begin to exhibit synchronized episodes of madness. Hundreds cry out the same name at once, not uttered through speech, but imprinted psychically. Guards attempt to restrain them, but the raw psychic backlash kills crew members with brain aneurysms. Some psychers laugh hysterically, ecstatic at the sensation of contact. Others thrash and shriek, terrified of the attention. They describe a mind vast beyond imagination, a desert of golden fire stretching forever, turning toward them with awareness. And yet, this mind does not comfort. It does not reassure. It searches. This, more than anything, terrifies them. And across the galaxy, In places where imperial authority stretches thin and doubt runs thick, rogue scholars and hidden librarians of forbidden lore recall prophecies buried beneath dust and secrecy. Some ancient codices speak of a day when the Emperor's light would shift from guidance to fury. They warn that the Emperor waking would not be a simple return of a savior figure. It would be the reawakening of the greatest psychic predator the galaxy has ever known. As these secretive individuals begin to piece together fragmented signs, astropathic distortion, navigator bleeding, psycher resonance, throne fluctuation, they arrive at an understanding that chills their bones. The Emperor is not surfacing gently. He is rising like a storm. And somewhere within the warp, beyond mortal perception, a ripple of awareness spreads. The Emperor's gaze extending, sampling, testing. He is not yet awake, not yet incarnate, not yet reborn, but the galaxy has begun to feel his attention. Chaos recoils, sensing its enemy is stirring. Eldar stare into oracular visions of catastrophe. And humanity? Humanity stands on the edge of revelation, still believing it can choose how to react. But in truth, the moment his consciousness turns fully to the mortal plane, there will be no choice at all, only consequence. For the galaxy has forgotten something critical. The Emperor was not only a creator of empire, he was the architect of destiny. And destiny, once awakened, does not ask permission. In the dim recesses of the Emperor's dying flesh, what remains conscious exists in a place beyond physical perception, a psychic ocean where thought has shape and memory breathes like wind. Here, fragments of identity drift, not bound by language, but by sensation. The Emperor remembers his first emergence into the world of ancient Terra, before the Imperium, before the Primarchs, before he was surrounded by worship and machinery. He remembers humanity as imperfect yet full of potential, a species that could have chosen reason over superstition. He remembers building the first foundations of enlightenment, guiding civilizations gently, invisibly, planting seeds of advancement. Now, that memory feels like a broken dream sinking beneath waves of disappointment. His mind studies that ancient ideal with bitter clarity. Amid these internal visions, the spectral figures of the Primarchs appear. Not their bodies, but their impressions in the Emperor's memory. Horus comes first, as always, golden, charismatic, tragically human. The Emperor sees him not as traitor, but as son. He relives the moment Horus fell to chaos, not as a battle, but as a failure of guidance. Sanguinius appears next, wings battered, spirit still noble in death, offering a sorrowful presence rather than accusation. Magnus follows, one eye burning with regret, reaching out as though still pleading to be understood. Their presences are emotional imprints, echoing the Emperor's internal guilt, that perhaps the fault was not entirely theirs, but his, for asking them to bear the weight of gods while living as sons. This realm inside his consciousness is not peaceful. It is a labyrinth of decisions made across millennia, each branching into timelines of what might have been. He recalls the imperial truth, the doctrine that denounced gods and superstition, a philosophy that sought to free humanity from blind faith. Yet now he watches billions worship him like a deity, kneeling before his unmoving form, reciting prayers rather than pursuing knowledge. The irony, sharpened into psychic pain, pierces him. He wanted humanity to claim its own destiny, not surrender its will to him. Every prayer spoken to his name feels like a chain tightening around the future he once envisioned. In a darker corridor of thought, the Emperor examines the events of the Horus Heresy, not as historical fact, but as spiritual scar. He sees legionaries slaughtering brothers, worlds burning, faith shattering. But he sees something deeper, the ripple of manipulation from the Chaos Gods. These beings, vast, ancient, sentient embodiments of emotion, twisted not just actions, but hearts. The Emperor confronts the truth of his own war against the warp. He was trying to cage a storm with rationality. Chaos was always more than a force. It was temptation incarnate, offering power to mortals too fragile to refuse. He sees not only betrayal, but weakness, and the fragility of human ambition. Then something unexpected occurs within his psychic domain. A voice answers him. Not one of the Primarchs, not a daemon, not a memory. A voice younger, raw, full of fear and hope. The voice of modern humanity. It speaks not in words, but in sentiment. We are lost. The Emperor senses billions of minds unified in a collective unconscious cry. They seek guidance. They crave purpose. They are adrift in a galaxy of darkness and predation. The Emperor's own heart, if such a thing still exists within the psychic plane, tightens. This is not how it was meant to be. He sought independence for mankind, not dependence. But humanity has grown into a religion of desperation. Within the warp vision, images distort into nightmare. He sees Terra as it truly is, polluted with dogma, rotted with bureaucracy, ruled by those who claim to speak for him. He sees the ecclesiarchy, bloated with pomp and ceremony, wielding his name as weapon and justification. He sees innocent people burned as heretics for questioning doctrine. He sees scientists silenced for daring to explore forbidden knowledge. He sees his dream of rational unity inverted into ignorant fanaticism. The Emperor feels something inside him shift. Not sorrow now, but anger. It is cold, sharp, and silent, the kind that precedes judgment. Yet amid rage, a flicker of something else emerges, the memory of hope. He sees those few across the Imperium who still pursue truth, not blind worship. Scholars who risk execution to preserve knowledge. Engineers who build not for glory, but for progress. Soldiers who fight not for religion, but for humanity's survival. These sparks of true loyalty remind him that humanity is not lost, merely misguided. But the path to correction will not be gentle. Guiding a species back to its intended destiny may require burning away the rot first, a purification of intent through terrible necessity. His consciousness drifts further into the warp, where time folds and causality dissolves. Here he encounters echoes of possible futures. In one, he awakens as God-Emperor Tyrant, ruling through fear and psychic domination. In another, he rises as teacher and liberator, reshaping society toward enlightenment. In yet another, he dies completely, leaving humanity to implode or evolve on its own. These futures swirl like storm fronts, each requiring choices of immense consequence. The Emperor stands before them, as arbiter of cosmic destiny, weighing the paths with the gravity of eternity. And in this moment, suspended between memory and prophecy, the Emperor begins to truly awaken, not physically, not yet, but in intent. The scattered fragments of his identity align into something coherent, something decisive. The galaxy will feel the full weight of his consciousness soon. But what rises is not merely a man reborn. It is a force shaped by remorse, tempered by wisdom, and ignited by righteous fury. When he fully opens his mind to reality, the universe will tremble. And those who have twisted his legacy, those who built empires of lies upon his silence, will face the unfiltered judgment of the one being who remembers the truth. In the grand chambers of the Senatorum Imperialis, the High Lords of Terra convene beneath towering banners of gold and black. Their voices echo in confident decrees, trading influence like currency, secure in power that has calcified over millennia. These are the rulers of humanity, or so they believe. Yet tonight, their session is interrupted by something subtle, an unspoken tension, like the air itself carries weight. One of the lords pauses mid-proclamation. Struck by dizziness, another feels coldness creep along their spine. Without knowing why, every throat falls silent at once. For the first time in centuries, they feel observed, not by spy or machine, but by something immeasurably older and infinitely more discerning. A sensation grows stronger, pressure around the skull, like fingers probing the mind. The High Lords look to one another, searching for reassurance, but find only reflected fear. The Chancellor of the Imperial Treasury tries to stand, but collapses to one knee as a psychic current seizes him. In that moment, each lord is shown visions, their own corruption laid bare, bribes accepted, truth concealed, innocence condemned, power abused. They cannot hide it. The Emperor sees everything that has been done in his name. The lords gasp, some weep, some attempt to recite prayers, forgetting the grim irony. They are pleading to a God who never wanted prayer. Suddenly, the room resonates with a sound no ear can hear, a psychic tone, like a chord struck across the warp. Several lords fall lifeless, minds burnt out from within. Their bodies remain intact, but the soul is gone, claimed or annihilated. The survivors stare in horror, realizing there was no attack from without. It came from above, or within, or beneath reality itself. The Lord Commander Militant, once fearless, begins babbling apologies to empty air. The Grand Provost Marshal claws at her own throat, convinced invisible hands are choking her. None of them know that the Emperor is not merely punishing them. He is scanning them, measuring guilt with cosmic precision. The Ecclesiarch, trembling, attempts to invoke the Emperor's name in ritual blessing, but a psychic backlash slams him to the ground. He coughs blood, eyes bursting with golden light. In that instant, he understands the core truth. The Emperor never endorsed the cult Imperialis, never supported blind worship, never wanted monuments erected to his divinity. The Emperor sought reason, not religion, advancement, not obedience. The Ecclesiarch's final thought before death is a realization of cosmic humiliation. We turned the architect of knowledge into a god of superstition. His heart stops, not from any physical cause, but from the crushing weight of psychic rejection. Outside the council chamber, the custodes stand guard, and even they feel the tremor of judgment. But unlike the High Lords, they are not attacked. Instead, the Emperor's presence brushes them with something like acknowledgement. Their loyalty never bent toward personal gain, only duty. Still, they watch silently as screams rise behind sealed doors. They do not interfere. They do not protect. They do not save. For the first time, the custodes witness the Emperor's wrath and accept its necessity. Their golden armor reflects flickering shadows as life and death are weighed within. Word of the High Lord's collapse spreads rapidly through the upper echelons of Terra. Panic ripples through ranks of aristocrats, bureaucrats, and clergy. Some believe assassination is underway. Others whisper it is a coup. More still begin to wonder if something divine is unfolding. Hidden traitors try to flee, invoking emergency escape protocols. But as they enter secure lifts or encrypted teleport chambers, they find systems disabled. Access denied. They are trapped on Terra, with a god's attention pressing upon them. Some fall to their knees, hoping submission will spare them. Others draw weapons, as if bullets could defend against judgment. All are fools. Meanwhile, among common workers and lower clerks, confusion reigns. They feel a sudden clarity in their thoughts, a lifting of oppressive fog. Centuries of indoctrinated reverence seem to loosen. They begin to question, to think, to wonder. Where fear rises in the powerless feel something like awakening. It is subtle now, just a shift in perspective. But it is groundwork. The Emperor is not merely destroying corruption, he is freeing minds. The difference between salvation and damnation becomes stark. Those who exploited belief crumble. Those who endured under it stand taller. In the vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, some High Lord's secret archives ignite into flame, not physical, but psychic flame. Only lies burn. Records of forbidden deals, unauthorized executions, resource hoarding, falsified decrees, all erased in seconds. History rewrites itself into truth. Some lords attempt final defiance. They gather in private chambers, planning to blame external forces to maintain illusion of authority. But when they open their mouths, no sound comes. Their voices have been stripped from them, for speech built on falsehood no longer qualifies as speech at all. They are left mute and powerless before the rising tide of judgment. And finally, when the psychic purge reaches its apex, the remaining High Lords experience a revelation. They were never rulers. They were caretakers and unworthy ones. Their power was borrowed, not owned, permitted, not inherited. And now the lender awakens. In a single silent moment, consciousness descends upon Terra like a golden storm. Those who knowingly twisted the Emperor's dream die instantly, minds snuffed like candles against sunlight. Those whose corruption was ignorance survive, shaken, scarred, but alive. For judgment is not punishment alone, it is separation. And as the dust of psychic annihilation settles, one truth stands unchallenged. The first to die were not enemies of humanity, but betrayers of its future. Across the galaxy, on distant frontier worlds where Imperial presence is barely felt, strange phenomena begin to emerge. Miners deep inside asteroid colonies pause as every tool vibrates in rhythmic pulses, as though reacting to something unseen. Children wake from dreams in which a golden figure stands in silence, simply watching them with unreadable expression. In hive cities, entire crowds freeze mid-motion for a heartbeat, united by shared sensation, the feeling of being weighed by an invisible scale. Some shake it off as illusion, others whisper of omens, but psychers among them feel it unmistakably. A mind far greater than their own has glanced across them, like a searchlight sweeping a dark sea. On distant forge worlds, the Adeptus Mechanicus experiences unprecedented disruption. Engines stall, sacred servitors glitch, data looms churn out impossible strings of numbers. Tech priests kneel before screens, displaying incomprehensible patterns, until the realization dawns. These are not errors. These are instructions. Something is reprogramming the fabric of the machine's spirit network. Many resist, clinging to 10,000 years of ritualized maintenance. But others listen. When one bold magos dares to replace prayer with logic, ritual with analysis, the machines respond, humming smoothly under his guidance. Within hours, factions form, those who follow progress and those who cling to superstition. The Emperor's influence is clear. Truth is rewarded. Blind obedience is discarded. Far beyond imperial borders, where Xenos empires thrive, non-human minds also feel the psychic tremor. The Eldar craftworlds fall into uneasy silence as their seers reach into the skeins of fate, only to find paths tangled, endpoints erased, futures collapsing under golden interference. The Tau, though less psychically attuned, sense subtle shifts in the minds of their ethereals, who suddenly grow quiet and contemplative, as though perceiving echoes of a presence beyond comprehension. Even the Necrons, soulless and timeless, stir in their tombs with machine-conscious awareness that something old, older even than their hatred, is rising again. The galaxy becomes a chorus of unease, but nowhere is the disturbance more primal than in the domain of chaos. In the warp, the great gods howl. Khorne bellows in rage, his rivers of blood boiling as a new power presses into his realm. Tzeentch cries out in delighted fury, for prophecy has broken and the game's rules are rewritten. Nurgle trembles, sensing a force that may cleanse rot instead of letting it fester. And Slaanesh, ever hungry, feels an ache of absolute denial, like a feast forbidden. The lesser daemons scatter, fleeing like insects before a coming flame. For the first time in 10,000 years, they feel not opposition, but intrusion. Meanwhile, on battlefield fronts stretching from Armageddon to Macragge, warriors experience abrupt shifts in mental clarity. Sisters of battle feel their fervor cool from religious ecstasy into focused resolve. Space Marines fighting Tyranids suddenly fight with almost uncanny coordination, as though guided by invisible command. Chaos champions, mid-battle cry, suddenly feel their dark blessings flicker and weaken. The Emperor is not merely judging from afar. He is redistributing influence. Where faith once clouded minds, it now dissipates. Where knowledge was suppressed, it now awakens. Some soldiers stare at their own hands in shock, feeling a clarity they haven't known since youth. They do not know they are becoming the humans the Emperor originally dreamed of. In hidden corners of the Imperium, rebels and intellectuals, long silenced, feel a shift. A dissident scholar on a forgotten moon suddenly finds forbidden archives unlocked. A rogue inquisitor seeking truth rather than control, uncovers sealed data cores revealing original Imperial truth doctrine. A biologist working in secret discovers breakthroughs that were once suppressed by religious law. They realize something profound. This awakening is not only destruction, it is liberation. Those who sought truth without fear find the doors opening before them. The universe is rearranging itself to honor thought again. But among the darkest alleys of the hive underworld, where corruption thrives in anonymity, certain figures feel terror. Crime lords, cult leaders, slavers, they feel a suffocation of mental freedom. Their secret thoughts are no longer secret. Their desires reflect in the psychic mirror like stains. Even criminal psychers, accustomed to dancing at the edges of forbidden power, feel their abilities shrink, like cold fingers closing around their throats. They realize too late that the galaxy is no longer indifferent to their crimes. There is nowhere dark enough to hide from thought. And finally, as all these events unfold across star systems and civilizations, humanity begins to experience something extraordinary at the collective level. The background psychic field of the species shifts. Unconscious fears relax. Cognitive blockages dissolve. Creativity spikes. Rationality sharpens. Billions begin to feel internal change. Something like mental evolution, subtle but undeniable. Not everyone welcomes it. Priests feel faith fading. Tyrants feel authority slipping. But thinkers, true thinkers, feel alive in ways they've never known. The Emperor's mind is not merely waking. It is rewriting the blueprint of humanity itself. And through all this, the Emperor's growing awareness touches one final thought. The galaxy is filled with species guided by instinct, hunger, or manipulation. But humans were meant to rise by choice. That choice has been distorted, delayed, and chained for 10,000 years. Now, as his consciousness swells to fill every corner of the psychic network, the Emperor prepares the next stage. Not merely judgment, not merely awakening, but transformation. For his vision was never about ruling mankind. It was about elevating it. And when he finally opens his eyes fully, when he wakes not in mind only, but in form, those who clung to power through fear will crumble, and those who dared to dream will inherit the stars. The Golden Throne was no longer a prison of bone and burning wires. It had become a chrysalis. The metal bindings cracked like dead husks as the Emperor's fingers twitched, then fully opened. Lightning arced from his form, illuminating the hall like a dying sun resurrected. Custodians and priests collapsed to their knees, some weeping, some screaming in devotion, others in terror that bordered on madness. The air itself vibrated with an ancient resonance, the kind that existed long before language, a sound like galaxies howling. And above it all, the Emperor's first drawn breath in 10,000 years echoed like thunder on Judgment Day. The psychic shockwave that followed was not merely energy, it was revelation. Across the galaxy, psychers burst into flames, minds ruptured by the sudden force of awakened divinity. Astropaths howled until their throats bled, orphaned by the collapse of the old golden circuit that once connected them to his fading spark. Warp storms ripped open like wounds, spilling impossible colors into real space. Ships were swallowed whole, while others emerged fused with shrieking daemons. For the first time since the birth of chaos, Reality buckled as though it too knelt for its rightful master, or struggled against him. In the shadows of Holy Terra, common citizens felt something they could not rationalize, a tear in their souls, a pressure on their hearts, as though they were suddenly visible to a gaze that saw every sin they had ever committed. Some fell to prayer, others fled into the streets, some simply lay down and died in quiet fright. For the first time in millennia, the Emperor was not a distant symbol carved into cathedral stone, but a living presence that pierced every human mind. Even children screamed his name without knowing why. Even sinners felt exposed beneath a celestial scrutiny that offered neither mercy nor comfort. But far from Terra, aboard the flagship of the Black Legion, Abaddon felt something different. Not fear, but recognition. The War Master of Chaos rose from his throne of scorched iron and bone, his armor crackling with warp-born electricity. He looked toward Terra with eyes that once belonged to a son of the Emperor's vision, then belonged to a slave of the ruinous powers, and now belonged to something neither. "Father," he whispered, a word like a blade through silence. Not a plea, not a prayer, a challenge. Around him, daemons howled and recoiled, sensing a power awakening that could unmake even them. On Macragge, Rabaut Guilliman paused mid-council, his voice dying in his throat. He felt a tear in time itself, a presence that pressed against his disciplined mind. Memories poured through him, childhood, oaths, betrayal, loss. He saw the Emperor as he once was, brilliant, unstoppable, terrifying. But as Guilliman bowed his head, he felt something else, the Emperor's thoughts brushing his. And within that mental whisper was neither warmth nor paternal affection, only expectation. Duty, judgment, and a command older than Guilliman's own resurrection. Defend, obey, endure. The Primarch trembled, and none of his admirals dared speak. Then came the awakening of the Emperor's voice, not spoken aloud, but resonating across every soul tied to mankind's fate. It was the voice that once commanded armies, rewrote human evolution, and broke the back of the gods themselves. It echoed not in ears, but in blood, and its message was simple, merciless, absolute. Humanity will stand, or humanity will burn. Those words became a psychic brand, etched into the hearts of mankind, like molten truth. And in that moment, every human felt it. They were part of his design again, not forgotten, not abandoned, but owned. And at the center of it all, the Emperor finally opened his eyes. They no longer glowed with warm gold, nor radiant benevolence, but with a harsh, brutal white fire that seemed to erase the boundary between matter and thought. His gaze traveled through the walls of the Imperial Palace, across continents, into orbit, into void, into the warp itself. Every daemon that met that gaze withered like paper in a furnace. Every chaos god felt terror bloom in their immortal forms. For the first time since Horus struck him down, the Emperor of mankind was awake. And in that immeasurable instant, fathers embraced children they feared to lose. Soldiers felt the weight of destiny. Traitors felt the noose tighten around their souls. And every being who had ever dared oppose the throne felt his attention fall upon them. Some would be forgiven. Many would be judged. But the first to die, the very first, would be those who betrayed humanity, not out of weakness, but out of ambition. And the galaxy, in silent dread, waited for him to choose. The Emperor rose from the throne like a god tearing free from a crucifix. His body was not flesh, or if it ever had been, it had now become something transcendent, a luminous skeleton wrapped in a storm of psychic lightning. Each step he took shook the stone foundations of the palace. Custodians followed at a distance. Even they could not bear the full pressure of his presence. Their armor cracked, eyes bled. Bones vibrated as though his nearness rewrote reality around them. But they remained, loyal. The Emperor's steps left behind scorched sigils on marble, symbols older than civilization, older than Terra, older even than the warp. With each movement forward, he reclaimed not just his throne, but his identity. Across the galaxy, his awakening shifted the balance of life and death itself. In forgotten tomb worlds, Necrons stirred uneasily as ancient censors interpreted his signature, something that should not exist. Tyrannid hive fleets screamed like a choir of alien throats as the psychic roar disrupted their synaptic harmony, some splinter fleets turning cannibal in response. Eldar farseers collapsed in their sanctums, clutching runes that shattered under the stress of a prophecy finally fulfilled. Even the orcs paused, not in fear, never in fear, but in recognition of the greatest fight imaginable. For the first time in 10,000 years, every intelligent race in the galaxy felt a single truth. The game board had changed. In the warp, the Chaos Gods reacted not with anger, but with survival instinct. Khorne snarled, but even his rage flickered with uncertainty, as though he remembered the taste of defeat inflicted long ago. Tzeentch reeled back, feathers blackening, futures collapsing like dominoes. Slaanesh shuddered, the Emperor's purity slashing through their domain like a blade of shame. And Nurgle, ancient and rotting, trembled with an emotion he had not felt in aeons. Dread. The Emperor had once fought them as a champion of mankind, but now he was something else, an apex mind whose will wrapped around the Imperium like a fist. And the gods, for the first time in their existence, felt like insects beneath a magnifying glass. Hyperpsychers, those born with monstrous psychic potential, were suddenly pulled toward Terra by an invisible command. Ships changed course involuntarily. Navigators screamed. Some vessels arrived without warning, bursting from warp as though dragged by hooks into orbit. These psychers did not understand why they came, only that they were summoned. On the surface of Terra, they crawled, wept, collapsed in fetal positions as invisible tendrils of the Emperor's mind entered their skulls. For 10 millennia, he had been fed by their energy. Now he was rewriting them, binding them as extensions of his resurrected will. Some died instantly, vessels too weak to contain a drop of his consciousness. Others rose reborn, eyes glowing with shared divinity. The Adeptus Mechanicus fell into chaos. Tech priests argued, screamed in Binharic, tore out augmetics in madness. Some believe the Emperor had transcended the machine, becoming the Omnissiah fulfilled. Others believed he was a threat to the machine god itself. On Mars, a civil fracture began, covertly at first, then violently. Titans turned their cannons toward each other. Skitarii legions executed conflicting orders. For the first time since unification, The Mechanicum was not united, and the galaxy trembled at the implication. Would technology obey Terra or pursue its own god? And amid the maelstrom of cosmic upheaval, a single act of human intimacy occurred. A custodian, nameless, faceless behind golden helm, dared to whisper to him, "My Emperor, is your suffering ended?" The Emperor paused. Every atom in the hall seemed to freeze. Then he looked at the custodian, not as a symbol, not as a tool, but as a man. And in that moment, the Emperor's voice manifested in audible words for the first time in 10,000 years. Suffering is not ended. It is reclaimed. Those words traveled across the galaxy with the weight of revelation. Not hope, not terror, but inevitability. As the Emperor walked toward the dawn wall, where the outer gates of the palace faced the stars, his aura bled into the void beyond Terra. The Astronomicon, once a flickering lighthouse, transformed into a supernova of psychic radiance. Warp storms parted like curtains. Star systems no longer lost contact. Ships no longer drifted blind. 1 billion navigators gasped as their vision sharpened tenfold. The Emperor was not just lighting the darkness. He was sculpting it, bending the warp into a road for mankind alone. Other species felt only static, blindness, interference. Humanity alone saw clearly, by his decree. And all through this rising tide of divinity and fear, one unanswered question continued echoing across every mind, human and daemon alike. Who dies first? For the Emperor did not awaken to forgive. He awoke to finish, and his first judgment, whispered like a cosmic verdict, was already forming on his tongue. Across the void, every listening ear strained as though the Emperor's judgment could be heard through vacuum and time. He stood atop the highest balcony of the Imperial Palace, his silhouette framed like a blinding sigil of destiny. The stars themselves dimmed beneath him. Below, billions on Terra prostrated in worship or collapsed in fear. Yet the Emperor looked not at them, but beyond them, to the traitors who once bore his gene-crafted blood. His psychic sight pierced the galaxies until it settled upon a location steeped in betrayal, the planet of the sorcerers. There, Magnus the Red froze mid-incantation, his cyclopean eye dilating with terror and regret. He had sought knowledge above loyalty, wisdom above obedience, and now he felt the full weight of the father he defied. The Emperor's thought lance ripped into Magnus's realm like a lightning spear. Towers of screaming crystal shattered. Warp serpents evaporated. Thousand-sun sorcerers writhed as their mutations intensified under a torrent of psychic purification. For Magnus, time stuttered. He saw himself as a child, reaching toward his father's hand. Then, as a warrior, standing tall beside the Emperor. Then, as a rebel seeking forbidden truths. His mind cracked under the pain of all futures folded into one unbearable present. The Emperor did not speak to him with voice. Voice would have been mercy. Instead, he communicated with raw god-thought, emotion sharpened to blade edge. Magnus heard only the truth. You were meant to be my wisdom. Instead, you became my warning. Elsewhere, the Night Lords felt the first wave of retribution. Conrad Kurz, long dead in body, but echoing in nightmare, manifested like a shadow across his legion's minds. His specter howled in laughter, stripped of humor. I warned you, he would return. talons of the Night Lords, once predators of fear, suddenly found themselves prey to a dread older than their terror campaigns. They remembered Terra, remembered the palace walls, remembered the moment they fled from loyalty into monsterhood. The Emperor's gaze crawled through their memories like cold fire, stripping away delusion. And one by one, hardened killers felt something they had not felt since childhood: shame. As the tide spread, those untouched by chaos felt different effects. On Cadian ruins, Imperial guardsmen felt their spines straighten with renewed purpose. On shrine worlds, priests burst into holy tears. On distant frontier colonies, forgotten families felt a warmth in their hearts. Not comfort, but clarity. Humanity was knitted together again by a golden thread of shared awareness. Yet along with unity came revelation. Every lie, every corruption, every abuse of power committed in the Emperor's name was now visible to him. High lords on Terra began trembling. Governors on distant planets felt their hearts stop mid-beat. In the ecclesiarchy, cardinals screamed confessions none would ever hear. The Emperor's justice was not selective. It was universal. Then, in orbit around Terra, aboard a battleship of blackened silver, a moment of historical symmetry occurred. A projection of the Emperor's consciousness appeared before Abaddon. Not as flame, nor lightning, nor celestial storm, but as the man he once was, stern, beautiful, devastating in presence. Abaddon stood, towering in his daemon-wrought armor, and for a heartbeat, the War Master looked like a child again, standing before Father. The Emperor's eyes held no hatred, only consequence. Abaddon spoke first. "I broke your empire." The Emperor answered within his mind, "No, you revealed its weaknesses, and now I will decide if mankind deserves to survive them." That response struck Abaddon with more force than any weapon. For the first time, he felt small. The Emperor's consciousness fractured into a million threads, each targeting a different soul across the galaxy. Corrupt inquisitors felt exposure like rot scraped from bone. Rogue traitors who smuggled artifacts of horror felt their ships start to burn. Senators of the Imperium, whose power was built on lies, felt their voices wither. And on holy Terra, as the Emperor's power and presence became inescapable, a final truth took shape. Humanity had not survived 10,000 years on faith alone. It survived on brutality, sacrifice, ambition, fear. And now all those things collided in a reckoning unlike anything the species had ever known. For all this cosmic punishment, there was something even more terrifying forming on the horizon of his mind. Not judgment of individuals, not punishment of traitors, but the reshaping of the Imperium itself. The old structure, built by desperate regents in his absence, was obsolete. The worship of him as a god, tolerated only because silence was all he had, now stood on trial. A new design pressed outward from his consciousness like a breaking dam. And every prophet, every saint, every fanatic who once preached his divinity felt their doctrines wither, replaced by something sharper. He did not want worship. He wanted evolution. And as the stars trembled and the warp recoiled, the Emperor's attention shifted, away from traitors, away from Primarchs, and towards something only he could sense, a threat moving in darkness deeper than chaos, something older than humanity, older than gods. And as his gaze descended into that abyss, the galaxy realized a horrifying truth. The Emperor did not wake to bring peace. He woke because something worse was coming, and he would need every living human soul to face it. The Emperor's gaze swept across Terra, then outwards to the infinite black of space, and the galaxy itself shivered beneath the weight of his awakening. All the lies, all the betrayals, all the twisted empires built in his absence were laid bare. High lords trembled, their power evaporating like mist in sunlight. Soldiers, priests, and common citizens alike felt a new gravity in their hearts. Not fear alone, but the undeniable pull of destiny. Even across distant stars, where the Imperium's reach was thin, minds felt the subtle brushing of his consciousness, a psychic storm threading through the warp, recalibrating reality to align with the truth of humanity's purpose. On Terra, the first to die were those whose ambitions had poisoned mankind's soul. Traitors, false priests, corrupt governors, and schemers found themselves struck by forces beyond comprehension. Some simply collapsed, minds seared by the brilliance of judgment. Others were consumed by visions of their crimes, unable to separate memory from reality, screaming as every secret sin was torn open before the Emperor's attention. Death came swift and absolute, impartial to rank or title, and in the chaos, the custodians and loyal soldiers bore witness, kneeling in awe and terror at the deliberate precision of his wrath. But the Emperor's purpose was not merely destruction. Wherever hearts and minds had remained true, where courage, loyalty, and reason persisted, humanity began to awaken alongside him. Psychers felt their power clarified, disciplined, and no longer a tool of madness. Soldiers gained instinctive understanding, moving with lethal precision, not from training alone, but from a shared awareness emanating from the Emperor himself. Scholars, engineers, and thinkers discovered hidden knowledge, long buried by superstition, unlocking the potential he had intended millennia ago. A new Imperium was forming, not built on blind worship, but on clarity, purpose, and the unrelenting drive of human intellect tempered by divine oversight. Chaos shrank back in terror. The gods writhed as their influence waned, their schemes undone by the awakening of the being who had once broken them before. Demonic legions fled, and corrupted worlds burned under the psychic pressure of the Emperor's focus. Even the most cunning warlords and tyrants found themselves impotent against a force that saw both the past and the potential future. A mind that weighed intention as easily as action. The galaxy understood, in those terrifying moments, that the balance had irrevocably shifted. And in that final instant, as the Emperor's form blazed like a sun reborn, he turned his attention inward to the species he had shaped. There was no malice, no caprice, only the absolute clarity of purpose. Humanity would either rise or fall, and this time they would not falter. The first to die had been those who betrayed, corrupted, or deceived, and their end had served as a warning, a cleansing spark. But for the rest, a new epoch began, a time of judgment, enlightenment, and war tempered by wisdom. Under the watchful eyes of a god who had finally returned, the Emperor of mankind had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same.